Hello, and welcome to AI Trailblazers, Voices of Healthcare Innovators. I'm Matthew Ramsey.
And I'm Emily Jo. As artificial intelligence transforms healthcare, we're engaging with today's leaders to uncover their groundbreaking work, learn from their visionary insights, and inspire the next generation to drive transformative efforts through the ongoing technological revolution in healthcare.
In this episode of AI Trailblazers, we're honored to welcome Dr. Francisco Lopez-Jimenez, a leading authority in preventative cardiology, obesity, and AI integration in healthcare. Dr. Lopez serves as the chair of the Division of Preventative Cardiology at Mayo Clinic, and he is Mayo Clinic's co-director of artificial intelligence in cardiology. In this role, he spearheads innovative approaches to harnessing AI for the advancement of cardiovascular health. Additionally, he is the editor-in-chief of Mayo Clinic Proceedings, Digital Health, where he is at the forefront of exploring the intersection of digital technology and medicine. Today, we'll delve into the transformative potential of AI in cardiology and its implications for the future of heart health. Dr. Lopez, welcome. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Emily, for the invitation. This is really an honor for me to be here. Thank you.
Oh, we are so glad to have you. Well, to begin, Dr. Lopez, we would just love to hear a little bit more about your background and your journey. Can you share with us how you started to incorporate AI into your work in cardiology? What initially sparked this interest?
Sure. Well, about 6 years ago, I have no intention, no plans, no idea about artificial intelligence. So I think that's very important to disclose because, I was doing very well with my research in obesity and cardiovascular disease, other areas within preventive cardiology as well. So I was invited by the chief of cardiology at Mayo and the lead engineer who was actually had just finished his postdoc at Mayo Clinic. And they were working on an idea to identify low left ventricular ejection fraction using the electrocardiogram through deep neural network. So they called me and said, well, we know that you do echocardiography, because that's another thing that I do. Would you mind joining in this project? So they explained, and the expectation was just to talk about the echocardiography and, to help them to identify the best or the gold standard for ejection fraction, etc. But as I start learning more about deep neural networks and reading about it, and then looking at the outputs, then another part of me that had been, I will say, a little bit dormant for a few years, really sparked the interest. And that I trained in clinical epidemiology before my cardiology training. So I had a solid background in biostatistics and had always been fascinated by probabilistic theory. So when they show me that at the end of the day, the AI will give you a probability and deal with it and use this in clinical practice, well, basically that steered towards the use of Bayes' theorem and probabilistic theory to use or to validate diagnostic tests, as you know, sensitivity, specificity, area under the curve, and all those things. So, and that was where my input was actually more useful to the team. And then from that point on, we just start, asking additional questions. And needless to say, we saw, for example, that the AI ECG was very good to detect low ejection fraction. And I mean, good enough that we were wondering if the analysis was good, because the area under the curve was 0.93, 0.94. And as you know, we don't really see that level of performance very often in medicine. In cardiology, we are happy when something gives a value of 0.8, 0.85. We use many tests, stress tests, etc., that the performance is way below that. So when we saw those numbers, we were fascinated. And then it was just a cascade of study after study and testing the ability of the electrocardiogram to detect other diseases, other conditions, and one after another were just giving us amazing studies. Another study we did early on was, the question was, can you identify atrial fibrillation when the electrocardiogram shows normal rhythm? And obviously, if you will ask a cardiologist back then, they will say you are crazy. I mean, you cannot diagnose atrial fibrillation, which is an irregular heartbeat, when the heartbeat is normal. Well, we test that question, and to our surprise, the electrocardiogram knows when the person has atrial fibrillation, even if the electrocardiogram is entirely normal. So that really triggered this cascade of studies, and for the following 2 years, I think we finished like 25, 30 projects and developed about 10, 12 algorithms. Each one of those was fascinating. Each one of those was fascinating those in the field of interest of that finding. For example, we found one algorithm. We developed an algorithm to detect cardiac amyloidosis, again with amazing performance. But then, something that we found early on was, well, the electrocardiogram is detecting those conditions, but still a number of patients get a positive test, but they don't have the disease. So then we asked the question, is that telling us something? And sure enough, when we analyze the so-called false positives, particularly for low EF, and then we follow them for the next 5 years, using retrospective data, we noticed that those with the false positive result were about 5 times more likely to develop a low ejection fraction. So it seems like the electrocardiogram was and is able to detect abnormalities that we don't even see in the echocardiogram. So that was the beginning of the journey. And from that point on, we have been just incorporating those tools in our clinical practice. We have developed a dashboard where we show the results of the electrocardiogram in a very nice way using AI. And the dashboard has been used more than like 1 million times already by clinicians. We do this under the exceptions that the FDA provides when an algorithm using artificial intelligence is developed in a particular institution. Then the institution can actually use that before there is full approval and regulatory process is completed. So hopefully we have more chances to discuss the specifics in how we incorporate those, but that was basically the beginning of the journey.
Wow, that's cool to hear that this is truly groundbreaking work. It's not even gone through all the approvals yet. It's just at the very start. It's such an interesting perspective to get so early on in the usage of this new tool. One thing that you said that I wanted to follow up a little bit on, because we found this to be a pattern across many fields. You said, the results were, it's saying 99% or 99.8, and you're not sure if you can trust it. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about your process, because we don't want to just blindly follow, oh, the AI told me to do this, so I'm going to do it. How do you, take your knowledge as a cardiologist and then decide whether or not the AI's output is trustworthy or not?
No, excellent question. So, AI is not different than any other technology we incorporate in medicine, indeed. So, therefore, we have to apply the same principles we have applied, for the history of modern medicine when we incorporate new technology, which is use new tools wisely. Never let a diagnostic tool to sway your clinical suspicious so much that you believe more to the test that what your knowledge, your findings, the clinical assessment will tell you otherwise, right? So that's actually a very nice way to support the importance of understanding probabilistic theory, which, the simple way to describe Bayes' theorem is, well, if the probability of something is not necessarily very, very low, and then you have extra information that increases that probability, then you might reach a level of probability that is actionable from the clinical standpoint, right? So let's say that you apply a test to a patient, and this exactly the same applies in AI, and I will give an example later on. But you run a test in a patient that has some symptoms of coronary disease, has several risk factors and some symptoms that you say, wow, this patient might have coronary disease. Then you do a test. Will be a regular stress test or could be AI based, and the test is positive, well, then that patient's probability goes from 20, 30%, 40% to perhaps 90%. So at that point, I think you have enough certainty to act upon and either do additional testing or even start treating the patient, right? However, and the same applies if the probability is very high, very, very high. You have pretty much all the landmark findings for a particular disease, and then the test to confirm the disease is negative. Probabilistic theory will tell you, well, don't trust those results at first hand, because those results have a good chance to be false, to essentially be false negatives, right? Obviously, if the probability is high and the test is positive, it's almost a certainty that the patient has the disease. Well, so we apply that in clinical medicine because AI, as wonderful as it is, we have to be careful that doesn't replace clinical judgment, doesn't replace experience, doesn't replace common sense, right? And that's, I will say, it will be the first thing. But there are many other things we have to consider before applying artificial intelligence, because being in this field for the last 6 years, I can tell you that AI is so interesting, so amazing, so cool, that actually we run the risk to implement this even before it is fully validated, just because it looks very cool. Just the word AI and hospitals saying, oh, we use AI for this and that, seems to be very cool, but that doesn't necessarily mean that what is being used is valid. So I think it's very important that before tools are being implemented, that there is some veto process to determine if the test was developed in the right population that you are trying to apply, right? That the tool has been validated in external populations, that the tool has been validated in a wide spectrum of the disease you are trying to diagnose. And this is very important because, when you see an algorithm that detects, let's say, dementia just by listening to the voice of the patient, or can diagnose autism just based on a video of the kid. Well, if this AI tool that might have near perfect results according to the validation study was tested using, say, full-blown patients with dementia or classic patients with autism, and the controls were entirely normal adults or entirely normal kids with no autism and nothing in the spectrum of autism, well, you don't need a lot of AI to perhaps recognize that the voice of one is different than the other, than the video of one is going to be very different than the other, right? So you don't need special algorithms to differentiate a fly from a horse, right? But you need more intelligence, or even artificial intelligence, to identify, a series of wolves versus dogs. So in medicine, it's very important to validate algorithms using the full spectrum. And finally, is to be sure that what you're implementing is ethical, and that is not accentuating any biases, and is not accentuating socioeconomic disparities that will not be ethical to implement. So those are things to consider that go beyond validation. Ethical issues. You may apply an algorithm that is absolutely amazing, but if it is not ethical because it happens to be biased against African Americans just because the algorithm was not created incorporating people from different ethnic backgrounds, then that is not okay to incorporate something like that in clinical practice.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was good. That answered my follow-up question too. I was wondering about how you can create these great AI models, but how do you implement them clinically? So thank you for answering that question. So as kind of changing the subject, we saw that one of your research focuses is on obesity and its impact on cardiovascular health. How is AI currently being being used to improve obesity care?
Well, that's an excellent question because as we know, obesity is really an epidemic. It's causing another set of diseases. So it's important to identify those who are at risk to develop obesity. It's important to identify those with obesity who are at risk to develop the consequences of obesity, because not all patients with obesity are equal, and also to identify those who might benefit from the treatments the most. We actually did a study. We haven't published the results. I think we presented that in a national meeting, but the study was essentially trying to get the electrocardiogram guess who has obesity and who has not. So a simple question, you get the electrocardiogram as input, and the output is high probability, low probability to have obesity, and you have the label, which is the BMI, so you can validate if the results were good or not, right? So, well, the algorithms were actually fairly good to predict who had obesity and who didn't. How did the ECG know it? We don't know very well, because you might see two electrocardiograms entirely normal or identical, and one shows high probability, the other shows low probability. But the relevant point there was looking at the discordant pairs, meaning situations where the electrocardiogram will say, oh, the patient has obesity, and the patient's BMI was completely normal, right? Or the opposite, that the electrocardiogram will say, the patient doesn't have obesity and the BMI is 35. Okay. Well, then we assess the likelihood to die in the following 10 years or 15 years, and the mortality for those where the computer was saying they have obesity was as high, but didn't have obesity, was as high as those who were actually obese. Okay. And those that the ECG will say, oh, they don't have obesity, but they have a BMI 30 or above, the mortality was basically the opposite. So in one way, it was able to identify people with no obesity that the electrocardiogram believes they have obesity, but the mortality and diabetes and hypertension was as common as those with obesity. And those that the electrocardiogram was telling you they don't have obesity, but they have obesity, they didn't have diabetes, they didn't have high blood pressure. So identifying those who are probably more metabolically at risk is one of the ways. And other ways perhaps might be, hopefully with the combination of artificial intelligence and genomics, is identifying those individuals who might be perhaps better targets for new medications to treat obesity.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I feel like you wouldn't think to use like ECG to like predict obesity, but I guess like there would be changes in your pattern. I guess like kind of along those lines, like do you have any thoughts on the integration of like wearable technology into these kind of research studies? I think that's like more what clinical trials are moving towards these days. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on it.
Absolutely. Something that is fascinating about using technology that have been already incorporated into wearables, like electrocardiograms or oxygen saturation or steps or physical activity, amount of sleep and all those things. Well, if you think about it, the amount of information there that might help us in medicine is just astonishing. For example, we know that when you use heart rate, resting heart rate to predict mortality, using a single value, okay, a patient or a person participates in a cohort study, get the full assessment with everything that you can imagine, blood test, cholesterol, blood pressure, etc., and heart rate. Single time, one day, 10 years ago, that single parameter, heart rate, will be the most important and the strongest predictor for survival than nearly everything else you can get in the physical evaluation, and even more than blood tests and so forth and so on. The single heart rate. Now, and you can see, the likelihood to be alive in the next 10 years according to heart rate, the likelihood to be alive goes up as the heart rate goes down. I mean, and you can see different curves separating big time. Now, that was a single piece of information. What will be the information you might gather when you get the heart rate from a wearable used for 24 hours, 7 days a week for the whole year? I cannot imagine the predictive capabilities we are missing there to identify health issues, and it's going to be an enormous source of data for us. So definitely the use of wearables is really going to have a big role in medicine. Now, regarding the ECG, for example, we have shown that an ECG that you get from some of those commercial devices or smartwatches can also predict low ejection fraction. Okay, even though the signal is different, we predict it with a full-blown 12-lead electrocardiogram, and you can get that with something that you are wearing. So translate that into the application of many algorithms to diagnose conditions, right? With people who are using either point-of-care devices or wearables, not even medical devices. So I think there is a huge future with wearables.
Yeah, that is very interesting. Just to see what we can do with more data, and I'm interested to see what your research is going to come up with once you start incorporating that kind of stuff too. One point you made earlier that I wanted to circle back to, also on the amount of data you have. We know we have all kinds of historical inequities and lack of data in certain populations who have been historically not cared for well by the health system. How can you make these algorithms that are so based on data when we've done a poor job caring? How do we not perpetuate really wrong things from the past when we don't have maybe as good data? How can you correct that as you're making these new algorithms?
Well, I will say that everything starts from the moment we plan the creation and testing of the algorithm. So we have to be sure that populations being used to create those algorithms gotta be as diverse as you can. There is no perfect level of diversity, but at least try to make those as diverse as you can. That will be rule number one. Rule number two will be, in the very early phases of the validation process, you gotta be sure that those algorithms work across different ethnicities and backgrounds. Okay, and I say backgrounds because it is not just about race or ethnicity, but it also includes other things. Some things may not perform very well in patients of a very low socioeconomic background because, well, guess what? You need an special expensive smartwatch to do that, right? So then, if that is out of reach for many people, then you cannot use that in some segments, right? But I would say the bottom line is AI has to be always tested after implementation to be sure that the implementation is not impacting equity. Now, I think it's also fair to say that the potential for inequity applies not just to AI. I mean, it's part of the history of medicine, right? So expensive treatments, guess what? People with no health insurance or with coming from a low socioeconomic class might not afford the treatment, and therefore it's not just unique to AI, but I think we should definitely pay attention to that. However, the silver lining of this is that I really believe that AI gives us the opportunity to amplify the benefits of technology by scaling this and using this technology in ways that we have never done before. For example, if you going back to the wearables, if let's say many patients have heart disease right now that hasn't been detected, right? And hasn't been detected because, well, they don't go to see the doctor, and when they go to the doctor, they don't get the necessary testing, etc. Well, what if what if we make these wearables accessible to people either in low socioeconomic classes or even in low and middle income countries, right? So then you can actually reach out to those who will otherwise may never have their heart disease diagnosed until they die, right? So I think that AI will very likely improve many inequities. And the best example is not AI, but it's technology, that cell phones are being used all over the world, right? So, and thanks to that, many communities are right now communicated when just 15 years ago, there were entire areas in the world that were totally incommunicated because there were no like regular landlines in those regions because it was too expensive. But now with the cellular technology, communication is everywhere. So the same is going to happen with AI.
Yeah, and as like as you mentioned, as AI gets more integrated into healthcare, like what kind of skills do you think a medical student should focus on learning today to be more prepared for such a future?
Well, I'm glad that you asked that because I can tell you that there is a lot of misunderstanding of what medical students need to know and to learn to better understand AI. I will start by listing the things that you don't have to learn. Okay, you don't have to learn how to code. You don't have to learn Python and complex programming. You don't have to learn the whereabouts of computer science. Okay, in the same way, you don't have to learn nuclear physics to understand how to interpret a nuclear stress test, right? And you don't have to learn complex physics to use an MRI. You don't have to code and to learn the complexities of computer science to understand AI. That's very important. I'm telling you this because the trend has been actually that medical students are taking, a year off to go and learn AI coding. Well, we don't need that, honestly. What we need medical students to learn is, number one, what are the general principles behind how AI is being created, and related to what I was just explaining, right? So you use any type of data, is being processed, and it's going to give you an output, and the output is usually in the form of a probability. And understanding that is usually a big step because you will not be dealing with images, you will not be dealing with complex signals as outputs. The outputs are generally reported as probabilities. So that takes me to the second thing that medical students really need to learn, and that's probabilistic theory. To understand very well and to master what sensitivity, specificity, positive predictive value, negative predictive value, area under the curve, hazard ratios, what is the meaning of that? Because obviously, you learn that in a way when you learn, when you learn some basic biostatistics and when you learn how to interpret tests, but here more than ever, it is really imperative that medical students really understand that, because otherwise they will be applying tests inappropriately. And finally, is becoming comfortable with having AI around us. I think that's critical. The fear that many clinicians, particularly in my generation and above and older, is like, gosh, AI is going to replace doctors. Well, guess what? AI will not replace doctors. AI is here to be an ally, is here to help us to be better doctors, is here to help us provide better care, to amplify the benefits of medicine to more people. That's really what AI is going to give us. So there is no reason to be fearful about AI. It is important to embrace AI. So I think medical students really need to embrace AI and see that as another technology that you use every day, as you use your cell phones and the computers and everything, right? I mean, your generation grew up with cell phones. Well, mine didn't, right? There were people and still some who don't even want to open a smartphone because they feel intimidated, right? So basically, I think the newer generations will have to really continue embracing AI as the future to practice medicine.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, Dr. Lopez, I know we're coming to the end of our time here. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. I know you're very busy. Just as our final question, we would love to hear what makes you most excited when you think about the future of AI and cardiology. What makes you the most excited?
I get very excited thinking about an uncertain future. Okay, that sounds crazy, but the uncertainty of what is coming, but only knowing that what is coming is going to be exciting. It's going to be blowing our minds on novelty and paradigms that will be completely new. I think that's exciting because novelty is one of the things that keeps us awake, keeps us interested, right? So I think that's, to me, the most exciting part of it. But it's also recognizing that that is amazing to live these days. I see a lot of negativity around us about the negative things that are happening to the world. Global warming and wars and all those things. But the reality is that we are living in transformative times. These years are going to be remember as transformative years for everyone, and it's a privilege and it's an obligation for us. It's a privilege for us to be living in these years, but it's also a big responsibility for us to determine what the future is going to be, right? Because we are the ones who are creating the future essentially, and I think it's exciting to know that we all will be playing a role, tiny or not so tiny, but everybody's going to be playing a role in the future. And when I think about AI, it is just an endless list of possibilities in how humans will be better off in many possible ways. And whoever doesn't believe what I'm saying, all they need to do, he or she will need to just try ChatGPT or one of those things and start exploring, and will be like, wow, this is crazy. Well, just wait for the next 2 years, because guess what? ChatGPT didn't exist 2 years ago, right? 2 years ago, we didn't even think about LLMs or large language models, right? Now we have it, and now you can do things, and now you have the whole humanity concern about, well, universities, how can they assess the assays, because guess what? Redefine humanity, redefine intelligence, redefine what makes us humans, because I don't think that putting together a beautiful assay will make you a better lawyer or a better doctor or let alone any humanitarian career, right? So I think we have to challenge what makes us humans, and that's what AI is challenging us to do, to define what truly makes us humans.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez. It's really been a pleasure to speak with you today. Your insights into the integration of AI and cardiology has been really valuable, and I'm sure our listeners have gained a deeper understanding of how AI is transforming the field. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us. We hope today's conversation has sparked new ideas and a deeper understanding of how AI is revolutionizing medicine. Stay tuned for more thought-provoking discussions with the trailblazers who are driving this change. Until next time, keep exploring the frontier of AI and medicine.